You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
In the next couple of months, we're going to get a little bit back to sort of normal, maybe, depending on where you live. British Columbia is looking like it is getting on the normal train. Alberta is planning to have the Calgary Stampede, and I'm trying to get the boss to let me go cover the Calgary Stampede. If you want to tell me what the news value is, please do. I want to go just for me, but if you can, convince me there's a story, I can convince him there's a story, because I just, haven't seen an actual person in, 2 years now, it feels like. So the Calgary Stampede would be like a sensory overload. It would be like that. There was a gum commercial not that long ago. I can't remember what it was, which I guess makes it not a great commercial, or I'm just really bad at remembering things. But basically the premise was that everyone has just come out after the quarantine's been declared over, and it's this post-apocalyptic landscape of everyone just seeing people for the first time. That's going to be the Calgary Stampede. It's going to be like Zombieland 3, but it'll be a lot of fun, and that's going to be a sign that Alberta is back in business, open for people. That's the Alberta promise this summer. And then you go to my province of Ontario, which last week unveiled a 3-stage reopening plan, but reopening isn't actually in the third and final stage. Now, Ontario is a bit odd. They had, at first, it was phase 1. They had phases and stages. There was phase 1, phase 2, and within phase 2, stage 1, 2, and 3, and we never got anywhere. And then they went to color coding, and, we got to be in yellow for a little while, then orange, and then everyone went to gray. And now they've just thrown the colors out, they've thrown the numbers out, and they've introduced new numbers, a 3-stage reopening plan that is not at the end of which giving you no restrictions, which is, to me, what reopening means. And in fact, even by the text of this plan, Ontario is not opening in the way that the plan says it's supposed to. The first stage of this was supposed to kick in at 60% of the population vaccinated. Well, this week, Ontario cleared 65%, significantly above that 60% goal, and they're still waiting until well into June to open the province up. And again, I go to Alberta is getting ready to have the Calgary Stampede. I won't even be able to get a haircut in Ontario, which, as you may have seen on the show earlier this week, is desperately needed until July, because Ontario has also put these 21-day increments between the stages, irrespective of where the province is on these metrics that the province has set out. So people are actually doing better right now than Ontario says is necessary to advance through the stages, but they're still not advancing through the stages for completely arbitrary reasons. And Ontario, the province that had a premier that put up these open for business signs at the border, is not actually opening for anyone for the foreseeable future. There have been some rumors, and again, I must say it's not substantiated yet, but from American immigration lawyers, that the U.S. is planning to open its land border on June 21st. Now, this date is significant because it's when the current border closure is meant to expire, and they've been renewing this every time like clockwork since last March, and this is when they're set to do it again. Now, Canada has given no indication that it's planning to open its border then, but it sounds like if these rumors are true, and they are rumors, the U.S. is planning to open up, which means Canadians will be allowed to go into the U.S. for groceries at Port Huron or Bellingham, Washington, or wherever, and drive back to Canada. But the problem is you'll still have to quarantine in Canada, you'll still have to get a negative test, you'll still have to do all of these things unless Canada matches this with its own measure. There was a report this week that came out from the expert panel that the government appointed to look into quarantine and border restrictions, and this report actually suggested that Canada should get rid of this hotel quarantine program that you have to pay $2,000 for and get put up at some crappy airport hotel that the government has taken over for the purposes of housing people that are daring to travel internationally. And they're saying, listen, we should just discontinue this, end it, there's no point. Now, this has been welcomed by a lot of conservatives, But the report also starts talking about a vaccine passport, which I know has been a very contentious subject for people, and it lays out basically different criteria depending on people's vaccination status. And you look at this chart here, figure 3 in the report, it says that people who are fully vaccinated should have to do a test on arrival, that's it. People that are partially vaccinated should have to do a pre-departure test, an arrival test, a quarantine plus an arrival test, and then people who are not at all vaccinated should have to do a full quarantine and another test. So they're talking about laying out different criteria for people depending on their vaccination status. And this is something that provincial governments have not put in. They're basically doing, and I think I played a clip from Jason Kenney about this last week, they're basically playing the we're all in this together card and talking about it as though once we get to 60% vaccinated, 70%, 75%, then these restrictions will be lifted. Well, one issue is that a lot of people who were down in the U.S. Because they were trying to flee all this nonsense in Canada, a lot of the snowbirds got vaccinated, have come back. Because they didn't get vaccinated here, they are not reflected in the system. They're not reflected in the numbers of how many people in Canada have been vaccinated. So the irony is people that decided to get fully vaccinated the way governments were supposed to roll this out, with a 3-week interval or 4-week interval between shots rather than a 4-month interval, are, ironically enough, part of the problem, or what government says is the problem, in not reopening, because they're part of that, 20, 25, 30, 35% of people who the government says are not vaccinated, even though they actually are. So if governments are going to lay out these plans and say, we're going to reopen, then just open. I've got lots of friends in the U.S. who are telling me their governors are lifting mask mandates. They're walking around. We've talked on numerous shows about all these big events that are taking place in the U.K. and the U.S. Meanwhile, Canada is in the never-ending lockdown, well into its second year, and depending on where in the country you live, no end in sight. So I'll just put my hand up right now and say I'm an Ontario refugee. If anyone wants to take me in a more free province, let me know. Although I realize it is only incrementally more free if you look at the gestalt of a lot of these measures. But the point is, we need to do a heck of a lot better than we are. If you're going to reopen, and lay out some transparent frameworks that genuinely have a path to reopening. If you liked watching this clip of The Andrew Lawton Show, True North has lots more for you all over at www.tnc.news.